Welcome to the Universal Dancer podcast with your host Leslie Zare, author of The Alchemy of Dance and The Alchemia Remedies. Coming to you live from Cairo, Egypt, the ancient land of Chem. Journey with us to explore sacred dance, the sacred arts, the mystical and the magical. Join a community of like-minded souls seeking to understand the cosmic dance of co-creation through the sacred arts. Come along and expand your mind, ignite your creativity, and explore something new and something old. Welcome to the show. So glad that you could join us. And I'm going to just jump right in. I'm going to introduce you to my guest for today. But just a reminder that if you like the show, please share it with others. Please like and subscribe. That helps us to be noticed by the algorithm so that other people will also find the show. All right, so let's just jump right in. Dr. Karen McKinley Kurnaedy lives in a suburb of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and is a second-generation settler of Scottish heritage. She is a dancer, writer, and educator. She began her dance training in the 1960s at the Hanover School of Modern Studies in body sculpture and the classical dance, the first modern dance school in Vancouver, where she was forever imbued with the spirit of Duncan, Dalcroze, Laban, Wigman, and Menaka. Karen's work as a writer includes publishing several essays, articles, and books about dance, somatics, and dance education. Karen received her Bachelor of Education with distinction from the University of Alberta and also earned a Master's of Arts and a doctorate in philosophy from Simon Fraser University. Her teaching experience includes 30 years in the Coquitlam School District, being a faculty associate and instructing in the graduate diploma program at Simon Fraser University. Her interests lie in promoting and implementing new ideas for the dance arts, dance history, somatic movement practices, and dance education. Let's welcome Karen to the show. Hi, Karen. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, I think we have a lot to talk about. We have already spoken about a lot, so we'll refresh and we'll go back to it. But maybe you can just begin at the beginning and tell us how your dance journey or where your dance journey began.
Well, in my book and in my dissertation, which I was just rereading, I talk about my early childhood experiences. And I'm talking about as a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old. I loved to dance around the house. And my mother always had a record player playing like opera or something classical. So I just would be caught up in that music and just love that feeling of dancing. As I got older, my mom did put me into ballet, and I took Ukrainian dancing for many years too, just even though we weren't Ukrainian, because my parents had friends that were Ukrainian. But it wasn't until I was 11 that I was introduced to two wonderful women, Magda and Gertrud Hahn, who had started the first modern dance school in Vancouver in 1957. So this was in the mid 60s that I started. And my whole life changed because they introduced me to concepts in modern dance, ballet, and Indian dance and yoga that I had never seen before. And it changed my whole life. I became somebody that understood dance in a different way. I wasn't just mindlessly dancing around and enjoying it. I was given the bones, the structure of how to dance and how to express myself in choreography. So it was a whole different experience. And I stayed with them all of my teens until I was about 19. And then fortunately for me, I traveled a lot. I got married, I moved away, I had children. But then when I was about 36, I moved back to Vancouver and I started back with them. And I stayed with them until their deaths, dancing with them both. And even though they were in their 80s and Gertrude lived till she was 99, we still took class. And a few years before she died, she didn't teach, but she did teach up till she was way into her 90s. So quite a good example of what we can do as dancers. We don't have to stop dancing ever. So
I hope not.
yeah, I mean, it's you think about an artist can paint, a musician can still play the piano or the guitar, but dancers often, if you've been a professional, you might have injuries. Uh, our bodies change as we grow older. Sorry. And so I really believe that we need to keep moving in some way that's enjoyable or
It may
that you,
change. Yeah. What we're
yeah.
doing may change, but I think it's about continuing to move.
hmm So I find in my life now, I'm, you know, older and I still do my yoga every day, especially, if you've got pain or sore. I've had plantar fasciitis. I got rid of it with stretching and yoga. I take dance classes again now that the pandemic's kind of coming down. I'm back to my right now we're doing Argentine tango, and I also am part of a writing group called Writing Through the Body, where we use something called continuum. I don't know if you've heard of that, Leslie. Have you heard of continuum?
I've heard of it, but I don't know very much about it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating practice, somatic practice. So it was started by a woman called Emily Conrad, and viewers can look up. There's lots of interviews with her and her talking about her process on YouTube. It's about we're 70 to 80% water in our bodies. And she, over many years, she calls it an inquiry that's never finished. She's passed away now, actually, but it's about exploring our water in ours, in the earth, and in the cosmos. And she had developed this way of meditation with sound where you're connecting to the earth. Like we go through what the instructor is called a dive, where we're laying flat on some surface, and she talks us through and makes us vocalize that vibrates your body with the sound. It's I can't even explain the feeling. So it's humming and it's it's all these different sounds. And then we all get up and we write something with she drops a poem or some prompt to us, and then we share our writing. And it's I'm amazed at what people like. It's on Zoom. So we've got people from California and New York State, and it's great because that's one of the perks of being on Zoom is you can have lots of different people join your
Yes.
group. So yeah, and that's something I do every Friday for like 2.5 hours.
Oh,
And
that
it's
sounds
a
wonderful.
wonderful woman called Ingrid Rose, who was a student of Emily Conrad. So yeah,
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
wonderful experience. So
No, it does. Movement, I mean, in my own writing, well, actually, that's how I channeled the whole first book was I wrote while I had a notebook in my hand while I was dancing and everything just sort of came in. So I really do think that dance is a great way to connect to something greater that can bring in all kinds of very creative, I'm sure, artwork as well. I'm not inclined in that way, but whatever, it can open that channel. Yeah.
yeah,
So you've
creativity. Go ahead.
you've recently published a book, a new book, Our
I
Love
have.
Affair with Dance. So
Yep.
tell us a bit
Am I allowed to
about
show the
that.
cover?
Yes, of course.
And this, of course, is
Beautiful.
about this book is about my two dance teachers, and they had a love affair with dance all of their lives, and I would say I do too. So people that know that feeling about dance, I don't have to explain the title because it's just like if you are an artist or a musician that's deeply connected to what you're doing. And you don't need fans, you don't need people saying, oh, you're wonderful. It's just that inner experience that you're having that satisfies you and makes you feel that there's your purpose on earth, is to feel that feeling. And for this podcast, I would define it as a spiritual experience, which
And
we were.
this is also the book is about them, but it's also about it's about your journey with them, or it's kind of a parallel, or how does it all come together?
Well, I start out with me finding them when I was a child, and my journey with them. And they were already almost they were in their 60s when I started with them. But I never thought about that as a kid, right? They were like royalty, right? They were very stern sometimes. They were from Bohemia. So they were born in 1903 and 1905. And so they grew up in this kind of European way of looking at things, maybe. But at that time, this was pre-World War One, so it was, very rural, probably. But then the war came, and the whole of Europe changed. The Austro-Hungarian Empire dissolved, and Czechoslovakia was created. And so their area of Czechoslovakia was German speaking. And this is what caused, of course, Hitler to claim that this was part of Germany, right? But they grew up and in the 20s and became these liberated women, swept up in this time of they call it the Weimar Golden Era. I don't know if people have heard of that, but it was this time for artists, that flourishing of all the arts all over Europe. They do call it the German body culture, but it wasn't just German. It was they danced in when they got. I think Gertrude was 18. She went to Vienna. She joined the opera ballet school and performed, and then Magda joined her shortly after that. When she turned, I think she was 17 when she went, and then their mother died, so they went back to their town called Carlsbad, and then after a few years they established a dance school there. Then they started going all around Europe dancing, and Magda was very much in love with the ballet, so she danced with the Paris Opera Ballet, very famous dancer, Max Turpis, and various other schools. Gertrude was more into modern dance, and she danced with Mary Wigman, who was a very famous German dancer and choreographer. She danced with this place called it was sort of a school for Dalquoise, Eurythmics. They were really into that too, and you can look all this up on the internet. And they also Gertrude also danced at the Folies Bergère, which was in Paris. So I've got pictures which they gave me, or I made copies. um, I've got lots and lots of pictures of all of this in the 1920s. So it's kind of exciting to have a little glimpse into their experiences. And I've read a lot of books about this time, and there's a very famous professor in California called Topher. His last name is Topher, and he talks about nudity and modern dance in this time period. It's a great book. He really does. His research was fascinating. And he talks about there were thousands of young women that this body culture liberated them from the old way of looking at the body as, something to cover up and be prim, and you know, they the world changed in the 1920s, right? Women's clothes
The
changed, hair
roaring
got cut
20s,
off.
yes.
Yeah, it was the same in Europe. So they were part of this new wave of the way people looked at the body. And they also, with Mary Wigman was very famous. She trained with Rudolf Laban, and Rudolf Laban, his whole structure of how to look at choreography and the body and movement, and also his Laban notation as a way of recording choreography, is all over the world now. And they later in their lives lived in London and did train with him directly. But at that time in Europe, this whole wave of this notion of the naked body as beautiful and as expressive, and it was a huge beautiful thing happening at this time. Now, unfortunately, when the Nazis started to move in, they outlawed nudity. They imprisoned artists of all kinds, gypsies, homosexuals, everybody. It was just a terrible time. And even in 1932, even though the war didn't break out to 39, my teachers were Jewish, and it didn't seem to matter too much before, but all of a sudden it mattered a lot. And Gertrude had been became a fiance of a man from Bombay, which is again quite unusual in 1932. And she had made plans to finally marry him. They kind of put off getting married for a long time. They were quite interesting women. They always said they never wanted to have children, and they always said marriage and husbands didn't matter to them. But they did marry, and Gertrude did move to Bombay in 1932, and she kind of left. Magda had married a Czech husband, and their mother was passed, but their dad was a doctor, and their mother was actually a doctor dentist. So the quite interesting family. And Magda, I guess after another year passed, saw how dangerous things were getting if you were Jewish. So the father actually had everything, all his bank accounts, everything frozen. And he escaped to London and asked Gertrude for money. And he went to Bombay, and then they persuaded Magda and her husband to come to Bombay. So they were very fortunate that they got out before. After I was reading many things about what happened in this time, all the temples were torn down by the Nazis, and any statues of Jewish like composers or anybody were all torn down. Um, and this is before the war started. So they moved in and set up camps and concentration camps way before the war started. This was all going on as far as I was reading. But in Bombay, it opened up this whole new world for them. Um, Gertrude was like, it's funny how I knew them so well, right? But maybe I didn't. Like, you know people what they show you, right? So Gertrude was the pessimist, and Magda was the positive, more open. She liked children a little bit. She liked children. Gertrude didn't really like children. She didn't want to waste your time with children. But Gertrude started a whole new career, and I have in my book, I show all these posters of, her first performances, and she changed her name. Their last name was Hahn, Hahn, and they just added Ova on the end. And most Czech people do that if you're a woman, right? So she became Gertrude Hanova, and Magda did the same thing when she arrived a year later. And they set up a school and teaching Delacroix eurythmics, and they taught modern dance, and they also taught at private girls' schools. I've got all the evidence and they left me newspaper clippings and photos and letters and notes from their presentations. So in Europe at the time, I guess dance schools would have a lecture demonstration before the performances, and they kept that model all through their lives, even when I was with them in Vancouver, where you talk to your audience about what you're doing and why. And they were so into, I know we call it somatics now, but it was about healthy body. It was about exercise and dancing as a spiritual connection. So in India, I think they even had sort of paused to they studied Indian dance and yoga. And I think they saw, and I talk about this a lot in my book, they saw a different connection, um, as Shiva, the creator, danced the
Mhm.
world into being. They downplayed the fact they were Jews. They always said to anybody, I heard them say that they weren't political or religious. And then Gertrude would go, except with, and she'd laugh and she'd say, we worship the muse, the Greek muse of dance, Terpsichore. And then she'd smile, like, ha ha ha. But they actually, to me, they always um, had this connection when they danced to something higher and greater that you saw in their faces. It was a joy. That was the joy, their love affair in their whole lives was this connection that they had with dance. And they gave their students this by they were very serious about the dance. They called it the dance. They're very serious and their conviction was contagious. You got what they were saying and felt it yourself. So I don't know if you're familiar with modern dance history, but Isadora Duncan was a very famous dancer who was the first person to throw off the dance shoes, wear Grecian robes, and feel in her body a connection to nature and the universe. And um, they they had grew up with that kind of notion, and so that's how we felt. If you were a little kid in their class, you felt like you were Isadora Duncan for an hour, right? And then you went home and you were just yourself again. But in that classroom, you were you were finding some beauty with movement and some connection. And they never used the word spiritual, but it was there. It was there in the atmosphere. You know, we were doing something that was serious and important, and they always stressed improvisation at the end of the class, so that you, that you weren't trying to be a cookie cutter of them. You were yourself creating your own movement. And when I did a lot of research, I found this is what Mary Wigman and Rudolf Laban said and believe. They said, we are all dancers. There's a dancer within us that's ready to come out. And sadly, in the world, most people don't have that connection, right? They don't dance.
Not anymore. Yeah.
And
No.
so, you know, a lot of my work, when I was still working, now I'm retired, I was a elementary school teacher for 30 years. And I definitely used the Hanover method and style to infuse children with dance. And I figured out how to do it in, you know, not just the PE class, but in mathematics. You can get kids to stand up and show fractions with movement,
Mhm.
and you can get kids to show add and subtract and multiply and divide in their bodies with, you know, I infused it into lots of subject areas and explored many subjects. And luckily, the schools I was in embraced that. They wanted to see kids getting up and doing something, not just singing, maybe in a choir, but movement. So it's really satisfying for me. And then I also taught at the university how I taught courses to teachers that were already teaching how to infuse dance and music into your classroom. So I also found that really satisfying. And it's interesting to me, a lot of the teachers were like, "Oh, you expect us to get up and move around? Like an hour of the class was them dancing." And I went, "You got to do it if you want to teach it, right?" And then most of
You
them
might
just,
learn something as well. Yeah.
they did love it. So, I mean, you can use this very structured uh, way of teaching Rudolf Laban's movement elements to people. So he defined, you know, movement. You can use look exploring space. You can explore how the body can move, and you can look at time and effort. So those were the things that he really stressed. And then there's all these ways of looking at those four things. Um, and you can create, there's tons of books, you know, of lessons that he, not just him, but other people have sort of, he's very famous, explored his methodologies. So, but anyway, the
So
Hannah, sorry,
when did they go to Vancouver then? They from India, they went to
yeah.
Vancouver or okay.
Well, they were in India for 16 years and the war broke out. They were very fortunate that they were there. It was incredible. I mean, I guess historically people don't realize how many Indian people under the British fought in World War II and died. I mean, it's, you know, it's kind of a we're you're I know you're living in Cairo, but if you're in North America, it's a very narrow North American view of the world sometimes. And when you start looking at other parts of the world and what was going on during the war, World War II, it's interesting because it's not just the Americans came in and saved everybody. It's like there's a lot of other things going on. But after the war, they they were still married, but they both divorced their husbands in 1949 and moved to London, England, and set up a school and studied with Rudolf Laban and Sigurd Lieder, who are very famous choreographers and movement um, educators. So they, I don't know, they couldn't go back to Czechoslovakia because it was what happened in Czechoslovakia after the war is the Russians took it over.
Mhm.
And so, and then before that, I'm sure the Nazis confiscated all their house and everything they had too. So there was really no way they could go back there. And they both spoke English quite well by this time, having lived in India. So that was the language of the Raj, or not the Raj, the Indian, the British, what they called the overlords. um, and then after living in London from 1949 to 57, Magda met some people at a party, and they were from Vancouver. And she goes, "Oh," she told me this. She said, "I asked them, was there any modern dance in Vancouver?" And they said, "Not that we know. There's lots of ballet schools." And Gertrude had always been the one that kind of was the one that set everything up and directed them, the older sister. But this time Magda decided, and she just got on a boat and she went to Vancouver. And you probably heard of the Young Women's Christian Association, YWCA. She got, first of all, started teaching classes there in Vancouver. And then she set up her own dance school. And Gertrude saw that she saw it was really a wonderful place to live. She closed their school in London and she moved to Vancouver with Magda. And I mean, they knew how to promote themselves, I guess, from living in Bombay. You get your name in the paper, you get some articles, and they connected with the German, society, and they connected with all these different, groups that were active at the time in the late 50s, early 60s. And they attracted students right away because their style, I mean, there was a lot of dance schools, yes, but nobody taught, they didn't combine the Indian yoga, ballet, modern dance the way they did. It was quite unique at the time. And I mean, now everybody does yoga, right? But at the time, I don't think it was so
No,
well known. And
no.
I was very lucky to go there and be there. And as they got older, I mean, yeah, the school wasn't as big anymore, right? As they got into their 80s, but they had very loyal students that stayed with them and aged along with them, and Magda sadly died in 1992 from a stroke. She was 87, and but Gertrude lived till she was, I guess, no, Gertrude lived 10 years longer, so she was 99 when she died. Yeah.
Well,
And I still took classes, even though Magda died. I would go pick Gertrude up after my work, and I would take her to the studio. We had we'd have a class, we'd do choreography. I'd take her home, and at the end, she didn't want to go sometimes if she wasn't feeling well, but I still would go buy Indian food, and we'd have Indian food together because she still loved her Indian food. And she did okay. There was another student called Talia that really was wonderful to them. She lived near them. I lived quite far away from them, about an hour drive. She lived right near them, and she looked after them and Gertrude stayed in her own apartment till she was 99. So that's because of Talia Frith, that she was, her, not her caregiver, but she absolutely was there for her. And then, if she didn't have her, I don't think she could have managed. But yeah, and they loved dance and going to the theater and everything about it till, you know, to the end. So, I think if you love something the way they did, it stays with you and it gives you pleasure and a feeling uh, of being in the world that, it can't be equaled with a video game or anything electronic. It's embracing nature and the world, the earth, and realizing that we have our pulses and our movement in our bodies, right? As I was doing talking about continuum, Emily Conrad talks about our body is movement inside, and people forget this, right? We are mirroring the earth and the cosmos in our movement. It's happening all the time. We're not stationary. It's flowing, the blood, the everything inside of us. And so when you align that somehow with the earth, and I know there's a lot of people that are doing this with somatics, it is an exploration of something quite different than the mundane world, you know. It's something, it is something tangible too. I think people that start exploring these different somatic methods will find that they go, oh, I didn't realize, you know, it's like when you discover meditation, you go, oh, I didn't realize that this is
Yeah.
real. Yeah.
And I think for me, that's how I would define spirituality. For me, it's that alignment with nature and with everything around you, with the non material world, with everything around you, and kind of bringing it together. And I think dance really lends itself to that. Let's talk about that a little bit, the spiritual nature of dance.
Well, it's funny. I My dissertation, which is now from 2013, so it's quite a few years ago now, my topic was called Uncovering the Essence of What Animates Us Beneath the Dance. And I used that, um, how to discover this essence, which I think of as that feeling. Now, if are feelings real, right? Feelings are real. But I had to frame this in an academic way. And I was so blessed that I had two supervisors who were encouraging me not to write in the academic, strict, kind of boring way, but use a poetic way of expressing this. Make my work readable to others. You know, not just academic people. I don't know if you ever read some academic work. It's you got to really, even if you have a good grasp of English, you're looking at words like you're figuring out what they're talking about. So I really was lucky that I could write in this way. I was encouraged to write poetically, but you still needed to define what you're talking about. So the first chapter, it looks at backing up this idea that it's legitimate, of a spiritual essence of dance. And what I did was I looked at I read choreographers. I looked at phenomenologists. I looked at all sorts of somatic work, and it's amazing how many people mention this spark, this feeling, this joy that breaks out inside them when they dance. And so it was very easy to legitimize what I was saying because it wasn't just this flaky idea I had. It was real and backed up with all these people. So, famous dancers, Martha Graham, the body is a sacred garment, right? She would go before a performance, she called it her holy of holies, go backstage in this room and prepare herself. And if you've ever seen Martha Graham's work or her, I was very lucky. I got to see her many times. That woman projected something amazing um, in her dance, and most of her dances were of a spiritual nature, exploring Greek myths and all sorts of different topics where she just was riveting. It's amazing. And so she wasn't religious. So when I'm talking about spirituality, I'm not talking about religion. Um, so I was just looking over some of my notes from my dissertation so I could prepare today and remember what I said. It's funny how it's easy to, I've written this book, which is all, you know, their story. It's the story of the Hannah sisters' lives, but it's also infused with, I call it creative nonfiction. So you take the real truth, but you add in your experiences. So I have pictures of them where I just pretend I'm them, and what were they thinking then, or what were they going through at the time. So especially when they get to India and different times when they were young in Europe. I have so many beautiful pictures of them. And it's interesting how in the books I've read about this Weimar Golden Era, many artists, there wasn't just these big famous names, there was hundreds of artists, but many of their lives were the trail of paper trail of their lives was destroyed because of the war. And this one author I read said little is left to describe their lives. They just have little, like a few photographs. There's nothing to write a whole book about. And I was thinking when I read that, I thought I'm so fortunate that I have the beginning and the end of their lives in pictures to show their life. So it's more than just reading about these two dancers. It's sort of a history of modern dance in some ways. I talk about their pedagogy, and I talk about their spiritual connection to dance. But talking back to my work as uncovering the essence of what animates us beneath the dance, I took a clear look at what is spirituality, and you had to define it. So I called it divine immanence. So, and I found other people describing something very similar to that, but they might use different words. So, according to my notes here, it says embodiment can be defined as the integration of the physical or biological body and the phenomenal or experiential body. So, to me, that means we experience everything in our world through our bodies. We feel everything. We see, we hear, but people they seem to forget that. They think we're a brain in this body. But really the body is how we experience everything. And science, everything in science, if you do an experiment and learn about how to do a clear experiment, it's all about what you see, and then you write down what you saw, and then you compare that, and that's how scientific evidence is collected, right? So to me, the the idea that we can dance and feel and learn something about ourselves through this movement, the inner self, that connection. And then if you look at any spiritual dance methodologies, there's all a huge array, right? How different people have found some beauty or satisfaction in dance, and they're expressing something. What are they expressing? They're thankful. It's I did a whole look at early dance. Like, dance has been around since time immemorial, right? And people use dance to worship whatever they believed in. So we somehow moved dance into this box where it's something some people do. You go to a performance, and these are highly trained, fabulous dancers, right? Um, and then you don't think you have the right to dance if you're
Mhm.
not this very high caliber trained person. Well, that's what I learned at the Hanover School. Everybody should be dancing. And that was the philosophy of Rudolf Laban. In fact, Rudolf Laban started out working for the Nazis, but they fired him because he wanted to have these movement choirs, and he had all these ideas, about expressing with the body, and they didn't want that. So he had to get out of he left Germany and went to England and as a refugee. So interestingly, that's how he ended up in England. But I find it very interesting, his philosophy that, you know, dancing is a healthy way to move our bodies, but also to connect with the spiritual. And that can mean something different to everybody. It's not a religion, right? It's a feeling. I also looked at, there's this famous author called Csikszentmihalyi, and he looks at flow and all sorts of physical ways that people get a high from movement. So some people are runners, bicyclists, swimmers. and then there's the dancer, right? So we're somehow connecting ourselves through our movement, and I think it's all legitimate. Like the runner's high, it's not just a inner like response with hormones or what do they call it? You know what I'm talking about?
Endorphins. Yeah.
Endorphins. That's right. Yeah, it's something else too. So what that is, how that is it a mystery? I mean, prayer is a mystery, right? I mean, and so
I think it's a mystery to people who don't do it.
okay, yeah,
Right? Because when you do it, I think it all makes perfect sense. I mean, if you are doing spiritual dance or sacred dance, I think that everyone who does that is going to know what you're talking about.
but it's not
It's
about
not it
yeah.
it's not easy to define or explain because it is a feeling.
I think we're oh no, you're frozen. I don't know why. But yes, I feel that spiritual dance is something that is individual, but people can join others. And I think it's not about performance though. It's about your
No.
own self, right? So what I was saying about how my teachers and they learned from Rudolf Laban and Mary Wigman that we are all dancers, but we need to. And Mary Wigman, she definitely wanted people to explore their own dance and their own movement. She didn't want them to copy her either. You know, she very
Did she
interestingly,
have her own modality or she
absolutely, yeah,
w-
yeah. She had her own technique and she had the bare feet the at that time she I've written in the book I describe a class. Gertrude described to me the class that usually the kind of class that she would teach, and she had thousands of students all over. She had schools all over Germany. She was prolific in her work and in her teaching. So, but I wanted to mention we're talking about spiritual dance. Rudolf Laban's dad, his father was in the military, and he was stationed somewhere where he saw Sufi dance when he was a boy, which is very interesting. And that stuck with him, that what he saw and that connection he saw. And Mary Wigman also was into the the turning dervish turning they called it. She was also into that. So she said it gave her this focus that she needed to dance and choreograph. So very interesting. I was when I was very young, I traveled. I did the overland to India from Europe, and I remember we were in Afghanistan, and we pull up at night in this bus, and I see these lights, and I saw these men. I didn't know what they were at the time, Sufi dancers turning, and I was like fascinated. You're just I don't know if you've seen Sufi dancers live, it's you can feel this feeling that they're projecting. It's amazing. It's um yeah, it's so the Sufi dance is the um what would I call it? In the Muslim faith, it's the aesthetic um sect. I don't know. What would you call it?
well,
The
the
Sufi,
Sufis are a sect. Yeah.
yeah, of
So,
Muslim faith. But I mean,
yeah.
yeah, so it's esoteric is the word maybe or
Mhm.
but
Yes.
I love Rumi. He does talk about dance quite a
Mhm.
in several poems he talks about dance and what did I wrote one down. I was going to put on something rather. What did he say? He said oh, I don't know where I put that. I can't find it. But anyway, he talks about dance in several poems. It's beautiful. Um, if you want to explore movement with poetry, he's got it's I don't know, I can't even explain it. You just go, oh yeah, it's a feeling of looking at the world in a different way when you read poetry. So I wanted to mention my supervisor, Celeste Snowber, is a professor at Simon Fraser University, but she's a poet and a dancer. And she's written so many books that have inspired me to look at spirituality and dance and the body in new ways. And she's very prolific. Um, she's just recently published a book of poetry about, she's Armenian heritage. And that's very interesting. It's beautiful. And she does, I just went on a poetry walk, dance walk at the UBC Botanical Garden, where she walks us a crowd through, dances and does poetry with the trees. And that was the
Yeah.
magnolias have just come out here. It was beautiful. So she's got another book coming out very soon, which explores dancing outside in environments. So I was just part of um, I think it's on YouTube. It was for a local hospice in New Westminster, which is a little city, and we all contributed. There's 35 of us. We contributed us dancing outside in some environment. It's oh, I didn't know any of the people. I think I know two of the other people. Sorry, but it was fascinating watching everyone's creative take on a spiritual kind of connection to the earth. Like, it's
Wow.
fascinating. Yeah, I really enjoyed being part of that. Mine was in the snow because had really snowed heavily, and so I was wearing a big fur coat, and I danced outside in the snow.
Well,
My husband
yeah,
took
you
a
were
pic.
expressing that season. Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun.
I think it's
Sorry.
wonderful that you knew these women. That brings a whole nother dimension to, because yes, you can write a biography about someone or the sisters, but that
Sorry.
you actually knew them. I think that really makes it personal and allows you to bring some dimension into it that most people would not be able to do in a biography.
And I have to stress that it's a biography. Sorry, I'm coughing. It's a biography, but it's my take. So another Hannah student, they might write a different book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Their experience with them might have been different. But for me as a child, especially in these, you're becoming a teenager, like 12, 13. It was like the swinging 60s, right? And there's a lot of danger around for young girls and women. And they gave me this place to go where I could just be this other person. Like, I felt, I know, we were very well trained actually with the Hanover sisters. We would start every class with a Dalcroze kind of warm up of swinging your arms and undulating your spine, and it was always fun to music. And then we did yoga with Gertrude, and we really concentrated on flexibility, strength, and balance. And then we always did bar. Magda led the bar, and it was quite rigorous, right? And then we would go into the middle of the floor and do learn the Laban elements, and then how to apply those to choreography. And there were specific Hanova moves that they'd learned in India, which they said were based on the figure of eight. And we would, I'm not used to talking very much, so I'm sorry if I'm coughing. My voice is going funny. And we learned all these movements so that when we went to do choreography and improvise, we had a structure. We weren't just, moving
Mhm.
around. We had a definite way of looking at, they like to talk about dynamics a lot. So you can put strength into movement or make it a flow. And the face and the expression was very important too, right? And their themes, when I look back in my book, I look at, the 60s, the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I look at the themes that they um, were drawn to exploring. They didn't force people, especially in private classes. They left it up to that person to decide what they wanted to dance about. So their egos, I mean, yes, they loved that people came to their performances, and they cared very much that things were done properly, and that it was professional. The presentation was well presented, but they didn't have an ego that they had to make everything about them. And so that they had this knack of when I was a child, I started out just in a big kind of like class my age group. But then as I got a little bit older, like 15, 16, I started taking private classes, and I also joined a little production group. So we danced around Vancouver at the art gallery and various places. And we had to make it very polished, our performance, right? It couldn't just be, they wanted to show something. Um, and they talked about their methodologies and their style. But when you think about it, it was that connection I had with them, that they cared about each person and drawing out of them their personal talent and strengths. So when you danced, you weren't trying to fit into their mold of how to look, which is pretty special. And I think that's why
Yeah.
when I got older, I kept going. I tried different other places. Like I went to the university and UBC, and I took Graham trained stuff, and I did. It was interesting learning that, but you had to mold your body to do Graham technique. It wasn't about you. It was that was, and same with when I went to university in Alberta. I was really lucky. I could take a whole bunch of electives, even though I was training to be a teacher. And there was this wonderful professor, Dorothy Harris, who trained with Margaret Dobler. Margaret Dobler was from Wisconsin, and I don't know if you've ever heard of her book, Dance as an Artistic Experience. She was the first person to have a dance program at a university in North America.
Mm.
And her book explores, I mean, it could be the Hanover's wrote it. It was all about what dance is and how we're so her famous line is every child in a school is given crayons and pencils and paper to learn to draw and create art, but we're not given dance tools. We're not taught to dance, right? We're not in imbued with that what she feels is a basic human need.
Mhm.
um, for some reason, that has become marginalized in I don't know about Egypt, but in North American culture, definitely, right? So, I mean, if you look, I know that I'm not really into all these um, online things, but I see my husband shows me, everyone's dancing right on these sites, and but what is the dance? Is it to show off? Is it to get likes? Is it
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
A
sure.
different yeah, it has a
Yeah.
different purpose probably. Oh.
Yes, so those people look like they're really enjoying themselves, so I'm happy that they're enjoying themselves. But when we're coming back to spiritual dance, it's not about getting likes, is it? It's
No,
about our own inner, I don't know, I mean,
your inner experience.
and as we get older, for me, it's really changed that space inside of me. I understand it more now. I feel it's not as hard to find. It's there still. It's part of me that I don't question anymore. I've become I've become my mother. I laugh because my mother loved. She liked to sit in the sun and enjoy plants around her, and she looked so content, right, doing that. Like she understood something, and now I don't work. I've retired. I get it. I sit outside in my yard and I watch like these little plants growing, and I'm like, oh, this is so beautiful. Look, my lilac bush is getting little
Now
flowers
you
on it.
understand. Uh-huh.
I do. So I'm not saying that anyone young can't enjoy that or be that either. I mean, we're
No,
all
and
in
I
it.
think children just naturally dance, but I think it's something that's discouraged. I think we start out in that place. We start out in that place of moving and dancing creatively, and then we're discouraged. As you said, it's not. promoted in schools. Maybe drawing is, or even singing, but dancing is definitely not. And it's kind of strange. I mean, it's not promoted in schools, it's not promoted at home, and yet it's something we started with. So I guess it's discouraged in a way, or we're focused in a different direction.
And so, as an educator, I felt because I loved it so much. And all teachers are people that have their own loves, their own enjoyment of things, and usually in a school, the schools I taught at were like 400 kids, right? So usually there'd be a teacher that loved sports, and they would organize some after school running or something, and so I would organize things to do with dance because that's what I love, right? So I always, at any kind of presentation, any kind of like meeting we had once a month, we had a meeting at my last school. We all could present anything we wanted, right? So we'd have like this wonderful musician teacher. He loved music and playing. He would always have this singing present meeting the whole school every month. So, I would we would all contribute something. It's very theme based, right? Like whatever if it's a holiday or something. And it was, when I look back, I've got photographs I was looking through of different classes and what they did. It's so fun to see what I did. I wasn't just a teacher, you know what I mean? I was still choreographing and channeling that love into stuff. And when you first, it's interesting. I taught like 10, 11-year olds quite often. At the beginning of the year, you introduce dancing. And so I would get them to stand in a big circle. So it's not about me looking at them and copying me. It's about us all contributing, right? So we're all standing in a giant circle. And some kids would say, I don't want to do this. And I'd say, that you don't have to. Look, I'm not going to make you. What? Just go sit down. You can watch us. If you don't feel comfortable. Um, and it wouldn't take long before they would join us because
Don't want to miss out either.
they
Uh-huh.
saw how much fun the kids were having. And I'd get them to do things everybody got to bust a move, I called it, where they could show something. And you put on some music that's they thought was cool and had a lot of rhythm. And after a while they lose that inhibition.
Mhm.
They don't feel that they are embarrassed to be dancing in front of people, right? um, and then I got them to do a lot of group work. So after we would warm up and have a few laughs and showing things, I got them to go into a group, and I gave them criteria where they had to have a beginning and an end clearly, and then they had to incorporate what I asked them to do that day. They had to show levels. They had to show dynamics or something. So in the group, say 4 people or 5, they had to negotiate together to create some little piece, and it was just very short, right? And it's amazing how that could be looked at not as a dance class, but as um, a way of getting people to work together,
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
connect, to collaborate, but also negotiate. And so I had to create these rules. So everybody in the group got one of their movements in the piece, right? Because people tend to take things over, right? And run it. So there'd be people, every group would have somebody that wanted to run the whole thing and get their
The boss.
you can't do that. You got to do it this way. And I sort of made it, no, no, everybody's got to take their turn and get their own stuff in there, right? So it was really a way to and I didn't let them just create the groups, so that be the popular people together. I mean, it's funny how human beings are, right?
Mhm.
It's like a grade 5 classroom can be a microcosm
Yeah.
of the of humanity. Like, okay, everybody, let's line up, and then somebody always pushes to the front, and then there's somebody at the back of the line, so it's funny how it's very in British Columbia to foster all sorts of new concepts in education. So I'm very pleased that they have adopted and into the curriculum. If you look, you can go on the website, the BC Ministry of Education. They've adopted all these native wisdom into our
Wow.
curriculum. And I'm so impressed that somebody had the foresight to do that, because it
Yes.
it opens up a whole new way of looking at people in our country and honoring them when they've been previously, not honored. And it's wonderful. And then they have these other concepts that they've introduced about mindfulness, which you can move into, you can look at as meditation, but you don't call it
Yeah.
that because you don't want people that are to think it's something that it isn't. So this is before I retired. These were all big
That's
new
wonderful.
things, and I'm pleased that you know we are trying to create human beings in Canadian society that are developed and whole and rounded, well rounded, and think about other things than just themselves. Right? Like it's
Oh,
um,
good for
it's
them.
tough.
Yeah.
I mean, I look around and every kid. I have a 23-year-old grandson. We had a great talk the other day. We went on a big hike actually together, but we had a great talk about his viewpoint about online stuff, which is not, I don't have that viewpoint. I'm in
Yeah.
this generation of people that we didn't even have computers yet, right? When I was 20. So I do have a phone and I do have, I'm on Instagram and Facebook because I want to promote things, but um, I don't have that glued to it feeling. Like I
No, it's
often
very different. Yeah.
I leave my phone in the kitchen and I don't really get that many calls. And then once I phoned a friend of mine and she was astonished that I phoned her because people are supposed to text now, right? But it's a different world. And
Yes.
we were talking earlier before the podcast about a somatic conference that uh, you were at, I guess. And I just had a look online at all the present presenters, and it's wonderful. There are people out there that want to connect using the
Yes.
body and understand the body as a place of knowing and honoring ourself in the world. There's a lot of people that are doing
Yes.
that. And so your podcast to me is just highlighting different ways that people can connect to what they think, or not what they think, but what they know is a spiritual connection somehow to that vitality. It's about why do when you say, oh, why do you dance? It's about this feeling of vitality that you seem to open up when you're moving, right? Like, how does that happen? It's kind of amazing, isn't it? Like, um,
It
I
is. And it's so interesting to hear different people's experiences about it because it is
exactly.
very varied or very personal or very something you can really relate to. So the full spectrum.
Hmm. And so my message would be, any way you find, like I've taken many styles of dance. I dance right now. We just got to start tango again. I'm tangoing. I'm doing that writing through the body with the continuum. Um, as a retired person, you have to recreate your whole life. And so this book I wrote about my teachers, I do mention them in a chapter in my dissertation, but it's more of a quick look at their lives. I don't go into a lot of details or anything. I mean, I highlight the spiritual uh, thing I got from them, that understanding about we're not just dancing, like moving our bodies. There's something inside of us flowing and moving, and it's a wonderful thing. That's what I got from them, so that's why I included them in the dissertation. But I remember my supervisor saying to me, "And now you need to write a book about your teachers, a full book." And it took me a little while, but I had all the material, and I thought, yes, this is what I need to do. And it's part of my story too, right?
Hmm.
Because they influenced me. They were my important mentors, and my supervisors were my mentors. I mean, we all can have mentors in our lives at different times in our lives. And so joining a class like it's so sad that we've had to not be physically with other people for the last few years, but I think things are just starting to open up a little bit again. But I encourage people to join some kind of class, like I before the pandemic, I took belly dancing, which is really hard. And, I've taken all kinds of ballroom dancing. When I first retired, I tried different other um, modern dance classes, because now all of a sudden I was available during the day, right? I could do things. But it's enriching to 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 dance and to move, and so you want to transmit that to other people. So, and
And
I'm
to
not.
look and to keep looking until you find that one that really
Mhm,
appeals to you, some way that you feel you want to express yourself.
mhm. And we were talking about this before, how you know, yeah, different strokes for different folks, right? Like what we were saying how you might find something at this time in your life, but then you move forward
Hmm.
and then you find something else. So you can definitely keep exploring, and one thing might not happen anymore, and then you go on to something else. And I noticed that, different groups are on Facebook of, the Christian dancing. There's a different in the church. I remember when I was younger, you weren't allowed to dance in the church. That was a no-no. And I asked the pastor at this little church I went to in Kelowna why we couldn't dance, and he said, "Well, there's too many men that will look at the female body and think bad thoughts." And I thought, "Oh no." I guess so. I don't know. And I remember when I was, young woman with little kids, and in that church, and there was no dancing. I wanted to create some choreography and do something, but I never could, right? But I taught at the community center in Kelowna, the Hanover method. So,
Yeah, there's
you
always
know,
another way. Yes.
yeah. So,
Well, and I hope people will read your book. I'm looking forward to reading it. And so let us know also about any up and coming events that you have. You're doing some launches.
I
When are
am.
those happening?
Um, well, this is for Canadians in Port Coquitlam. I am having a little launch at Lee Square in Port Coquitlam at the Michael Wright Gallery on May 26th from 7 to 9. And I live in a sort of small town suburb of Vancouver, so I know a lot of people in Vancouver think I live in the sticks. So I'm having another little launch celebration on August 9th at a gallery in Chinatown. So I'm going to be posting things about that. But it's a process when you write a book. I'm an indie author, um, and I feel that people can produce something substantial as an indie author. But you need to get, I had professional, you know, persons do the cover and the formatting and the photographs. I mean, you can't just, throw it out there, but it's a very satisfying process. And I'm hoping that the Hanover sisters' lives will be remembered, because they're just two of many people that have contributed to understanding our bodies and dance in our culture. And it's sad that the big famous people have biographies that people read, like Martha Graham and Mary Wigman and Rudolph Laban, but there's other people that danced their whole lives. It was such a
And
special thing for
contributed.
them, and
Yes, in
contributed
a different way.
in
Yes.
a different way. And it's just to read their stories, to sort of read a universal story about survival, uh, women as artists. I mean, I never went into it in a huge way, but women as artists have been suppressed all through history, right? And it was in the 20s that all of a sudden women were allowed to be dancers, and you weren't considered low class prostitute, right? You were a young woman that was finding themselves, right? So this was a whole new thing in the 1920s. And they jumped on this beautiful thing and changed who they were. But they had very supportive parents, and I think wherever they found themselves on all the continents they lived, they created a school and drew students because of their philosophy and their unique kind of approach to dance.
So if you want to find out more about Karen, you can go to her website, which is her name, Karen McLean. Sorry,
McKinley?
McKinley.
Yeah,
I'm dyslexic.
that's
Karen
okay.
McKinley, Kurnaedy.com. And I will put that in the show notes. And also on Instagram, same, it's her full name. And I'll put that in the show notes. And on Facebook. So, well, we have Twitter as well. Sorry. Yes.
I hardly Twitter though. I read everybody's and I go, "Oh
Yeah,
no, I don't
I
know what
have
I'm
an
doing."
account, but I
It's
don't
fun to
actually
read.
use it. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
That's just a whole nother avenue. So
it
yes.
is. It is.
Well,
Yeah.
anyway, well, thank you. Thank you, Karen, for being here today and speaking to us about your journey and your book and the Hanova sisters. I look forward to reading your book. And and I hope you have great success because I agree. I think there are a lot of people that contributed and they should be remembered as well. And I think these are inspiring stories of people who followed their heart or these interesting journeys that they were on. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for being
You're
here.
welcome. Thank you. That was my pleasure.
Bye bye. All right. Well, let me just tell you about what's going to happen next month. I have Julia Aplin. She's an award winning choreographer and founder of Upward Spiral, and that will air on June 12th. All right. Well, thank you all for being here, for watching. Please like and subscribe. As I said, that helps other people find the podcast or the YouTube video, however you're watching or listening. And I hope that you will be joining us, hopefully joining us live in the future. All right. Thank you. Bye bye.